The conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is provoking pushback from a growing number of young Jewish Americans. Anti-Zionist Jews have formed a major part of the anti-war protests that have taken place across the U.S., and they are not taking kindly to being accused of racism towards their own community. Given the importance of U.S. support for Israel, it is a movement that could prove pivotal. Simone Zimmerman is one of the leaders of that movement, the co-founder of IfNotNow, an advocacy group that aims to sway American Jews against the occupation. She also campaigns against anti-Semitism and its weaponization by the pro-Israel lobby. But she wasn't always on that side of the argument. Simone Zimmerman was raised a committed Zionist. Her transition away from that way of thinking forms the core of an award-winning documentary called Israelism that was released last year.
I wanted to know answers from within my own community, and nobody could answer those questions for me. How is it that I am like the best the Jewish community has to offer? I've been through all the trainings, all the programs, and I don't know what the occupation is. I don't know what the settlements are.
Simone Zimmerman joins us now from New York City. Simone, thank you for speaking with us here today at the Listening Post. In that documentary, Israelism, a core theme was your personal turn away from Zionism. To start with, talk about your former self, the pro-Israel activist. What did you believe at the time, and how did you come to disbelieve it?
Well, I grew up with a narrative about Israel that was incredibly romantic and frankly simplistic. I grew up with an idea of my commitment to Israel as inseparable from my Judaism. I grew up spending a lot of time in Israel, and I planned to go be an Israel advocate on my college campus. We often said that that was the other battlefield. You know, the college campus is the battlefield for Israel's legitimacy. And so I wanted to go help tell the truth about Israel. Now that all got quite complicated for me when I began actually meeting students on my campus who had different life experiences related to Israel in different ways. I began reading texts by both Palestinian and Israeli historians who complicated the story of 1948. I learned about the Nakba, the mass displacement of Palestinians in 1948 that led to the founding of the state. And very quickly, that narrative was complicated and shattered for me.
And you're not the only one, because there's been a broader shift amongst young Jewish Americans towards opposition to, or at least ambivalence about Zionism. And we've heard those pro-Israel lobbyists say, you know, we've lost the kids. Do you think they'll ever get those kids back?
For many Jews, Zionism has meant a movement that led to the safety that offered an escape route and safety for our grandparents' generation. That's true in my own family story. Now, it's also true that Zionism has always meant mass displacement and oppression and injustice for the Palestinian people. For young American Jews, they're asking these questions in the same prism that they're asking other questions about, you know, racial injustice in America. What young people are seeing on our phones right now, these live stream horrors.
24 people were killed here. 22 شهيد من النساء والأطفال. 22 of them are women and children.
The bombings, the starvation, the utter horrors being committed against children. And we're seeing it on our phone live streamed to us by young people who, you know, look like us, who have the same aspirations as we do. And we want the same rights and justice and freedom for these people. And the basic ability to live freely and safely that we have. And I think seeing that alongside seeing these videos of Israeli soldiers celebrating their war crimes and laughing and desecrating the homes that Palestinians have fled in this moment in which they are responsible for the largest displacement of Palestinians since the Nakba, that is prompting a really dramatic reckoning among not just a younger generation, but I think young people are experiencing it in a particular way because we see it in such unfiltered means.
A lot of Israel's supporters in the U.S., when we've seen it, they've done it in the media, they've taken to labeling anti-Zionism as pure anti-Semitism. What do you make of that argument, that conflation? Is there a crossover there? How do you see it?
Look, anti-Semitism can show up anywhere along the political spectrum, just like racism and sexism. I think the real question is, what are the animating values of a movement? And a misrepresentation that we keep seeing consistently is the tarnishing of the movement for Palestinian freedom.
They see something on TikTok and they're like, Israel bad and Hamas good. And they go out and they start shouting at Jews.
It's a movement whose core motives and goals are to stop this mass killing in Gaza, to protect Palestinian life, to demand justice and freedom for the Palestinian people. And we see time and again the misrepresentation of that movement with these false charges of anti-Semitism in ways that, first of all, are such an unfair and grave attack on this movement. And in addition, they create deep confusion about what anti-Semitism is, and it actually makes it harder to identify anti-Semitism and be able to root it out.
You also do important work combating anti-Semitism, and anti-Jewish hate has been on the rise since October 7th. Is the media discussion around that topic, anti-Semitism, doing anything to help people understand what it really is and to fight it?
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's so important to actually talk about this conflation of Jews and Israel and to do our best to separate the two. The so-called leading organization that is often the leading source cited in media around this is the Anti-Defamation League. But the ADL actually has a long history of being opposed to justice movements, most significantly the movement for Palestinian freedom. And in the latest statistics that they've released, and this is not a new phenomenon post-October 7th, but they've certainly escalated in this campaign, they include in their list of anti-Semitic incidents protests led by Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals. So how can we get a true picture of the state of anti-Semitism in this country when the leading organization responsible for telling us about it does not have reliable data? I think that's deeply dangerous for Jewish people. And I also think it's important to say that, we are seeing increased numbers of Jews in the movement for a ceasefire, for Palestinian freedom. And I believe that those thousands of Jews who are out in the streets, not just in the US, but around the world, are helping fight anti-Semitism because we are breaking that conflation between Jews and Israel's devastating assault on the Gaza Strip. There's documented evidence that whenever there is escalated violence in Israel-Palestine, Jews around the world who have nothing to do with that violence often are unfairly on the receiving end of that blowback from individuals who target Jews out of their rage at Israel.
Last one for you. As a result of the activism, the exposure you got from that documentary, you've become something of a leader within the Jewish community. How hopeful are you that this movement that you're part of, American Jews Against Israel's Occupation, that something meaningful can be achieved in the coming years? Are we at an inflection point?
Whenever I get asked this question about hope, it feels important to say, first of all, that it's hard to answer that question in a moment in which Israel has reduced the majority of the Gaza Strip to rubble, in which we are living through the largest attack on Palestinian life and displacement and destruction since the Nakba of 1948. I feel deeply afraid for Palestinians right now and also for Israeli Jews who are deeply endangered living in this ongoing situation. In addition to that, in this moment of such profound darkness and tragedy, it is incredibly powerful to see so many young people waking up, asking questions, young and old people, joining these movements for justice and freedom for all people. If I just think about college campuses, I got to participate in Shabbat and Passover at the Gaza Solidarity encampment at Columbia University. And it was really moving to me to see all of these young Jews there in the encampment, grappling with the histories that they've been taught, having hard conversations with their friends, with their community members. That to me is hopeful. These movements for justice and for accountability are hopeful, because without that, the red lines that we are seeing moved farther and farther away from any semblance of democracy and respect for human life. That is very scary. And so seeing students rising up and demanding that is a path to an alternative.
Simone Zimmerman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
The turning tide of young Americans, like Simone Zimmerman, away from support for Israel and Zionist ideology could prove to be one of the major developments in the history of Israel's occupation of Palestine. But it is only the latest act in this century-long story, one that cannot be understood without at least a basic understanding of Zionism. News outlets have a big part to play in that. We need to talk about Zionism, explain how it relates to Israel's past, its present, and its ongoing ethnic cleansing of Gaza, its war crimes against Palestinians. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.